The greatest Wolverine ever. Next on Michigan Podcast.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Clark. Waits for it. Hit. Caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison.
Brady gets terrific. Throws it and a touchdown. Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him. And a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle. Caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet. Touchdown, Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Greetings, Go Blue. Welcome to this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. We're back here on YouTube, Stitcher, Google Play, iTunes, and more. I am Steve Deace, and we begin this week by asking this question. Is Tom Brady, is he now the greatest Wolverine ever? Well, I'd like you to consider the following 8 pieces of evidence that makes the case the answer to that question is yes. Number 1. Look at this meme. I mean, those pictures and the era, 2002 until now, pretty much says it all. 19 seasons, 6 Super Bowl rings, 1 GOAT. Also consider that Michigan now has more Super Bowl wins by an alumni quarterback of any other school, and Brady is responsible for all of them. For all of them. Next, think about this one. Brady has won more Super Bowls than 27 of the 32 NFL teams have appearances. Is that good? Kinda. I wonder if this one is good. Brady has won more NFL playoff games than any other quarterback in NFL history has playoff starts. That's right. Terry Bradshaw, Joe Montana, Roger Staubach, Ben Roethlisberger. He's got more playoff wins than any of them have career playoff starts. Number 5, he's got the most Super Bowl MVPs in NFL history with 4. Number 6, he holds NFL records for most regular season wins, most postseason wins, most touchdowns thrown to different receivers, most postseason passing yards, most postseason passing touchdowns, and most division titles won by one quarterback. Is that good? That's pretty good. Especially when you consider that right now, the only offensive teammate of Brady's throughout his career that are definite Hall of Famers are Randy Moss and Rob Gronkowski, and Moss lasted not even 2 years in New England. That's one of the reasons why he's got the record for most touchdown passes thrown to different receivers. He has been the one boat lifting all of the rising tides. And then lest we forget, hey, Steve, I mean, we know he was a great pro, but we're going back 20 years ago now that he played at Michigan. The only Michigan-Ohio State game I've ever been to was his last game at the Big House, 24-17 over the Buckeyes in 1999. Well, we forget that Brady was also a part of 2 Big Ten title teams at Michigan, a national championship team. His senior year, he led them to their last top 5 finish in the AP poll and threw for 369 yards and 4 touchdowns in his final game against SEC champion Alabama in the Orange Bowl. So, I mean, there's been some greats. Charles Woodson, Tom Harmon. You can go on down the line. I don't know, though, that anybody, you want to look at baseball, you want to look at guys like Barry Larkin, for example. I don't know that anybody can wrest the title. Greatest Wolverine ever from Brady, if you look at these 8 pieces of evidence, except, how about a bonus? I saved my favorite one. I lied. There's actually 9. I saved my favorite one for last. Brady is so great, he's responsible for all 3 of the Super Bowls won by former Michigan State quarterbacks. Jim Miller once, and now Brian Hoyer twice, who got to be Tom Brady's backup quarterbacks, and thus Super Bowl champs. Here, this tweet from Sparty, one of the greatest cell phones so far of 2019. So much of a cell phone, Michigan State actually took this tweet down after they were literally ratioed to the 9th ring of hell for this level of cutting your nose off despite your face and maybe a few other appendi while you're at it. Tom Brady, greatest Wolverine ever.
Brady in the gun, big blitz coming. Thomas picks it up, pass to Walker, left side, down the sideline, the 5, dives forward, and he's into the end zone. Touchdown, Michigan. A delayed call by the officials, but Marquise Walker puts the Wolverines on top for the first time this afternoon, and it comes with 5:01 remaining.
Thank you to all of you that are supporting us here on Patreon. We get asked frequently, hey, what can we do to support what you guys are doing here at Michigan Podcast? And one of the best ways to do that is to support us with a very inexpensive nominal contribution at Patreon. And as you can see, throughout the course of the year for our Patreon supporters, we do give you exclusive content we don't offer anywhere else, just as a way of saying thank you. So to all of you that have supported us throughout the year at Patreon, thank you. Thank you in advance to those of you who are willing to sign up and do so in the future, and go blue. Well, with the Big Ten season now officially halfway done and a month and change to go, I thought we might take a look at how I am projecting the Big Ten basketball race to unfold here in the season's final weeks. In fact, 40 days from today is Selection Sunday. It's just around the corner, if you can believe it. So we're going to use an article I recently wrote for Wolverine Digest that lays out how I'm predicting how the Big Ten race will finish. And this includes all games updated through Monday of this week and how I project the season to go from there. Let's start at the top of the Big Ten standings, where I am projecting that Michigan finishes with a 16-4 record in the league. I see 2 more losses for the Wolverines. Minnesota is a classic sandwich trap game situation on the road here in a couple of weeks. And then the road game at Michigan State at the end of the year, that would give the Wolverines a 27-4 overall record. I believe we'd be no lower than a number 2 seed, regardless of Big Ten tournament showing. And I think it's entirely possible that game in East Lansing could be maybe even a winner-take-all for the conference crown. Speaking of East Lansing, I think Michigan State's also going to finish 16-4 in the Big Ten. I project they lose 2 more conference games at Wisconsin and at Michigan at the end of the month, and Sparty finishes 25-6, and that they too would be no lower than a number 2 seed, regardless of Big Ten tournament showing. The next team, I think Purdue ends up finishing 3rd at 14-6, which is a tremendous season for them after the team team's 6-5 start. I project them to lose at Maryland, at Indiana, at Nebraska, and at Minnesota here down the stretch to go 21-10 overall. And I could see them being as high as a number 5 seed with this finish, depending on how they were to finish out in the Big Ten tournament. I've got Wisconsin tying Purdue at 14-6. I think the Badgers end up with 3 more losses here down the stretch. At Michigan, at Northwestern in sort of a sandwich game look-ahead spot, and then at Ohio State in the season finale. That would make them 22-9. I could see them being a top 4 seed, depending on their Big Ten tournament showing, because they had such a strong non-conference, and they've righted the ship after, they had a midseason dip, and they've ended up here having a really solid bounce-back season for Coach Gard after last year's disappointment really put the program at a crossroads. I've got Maryland next in my Big Ten predictions at 13-7. I'm projecting them to lose to Michigan twice. I just don't think they match up very well with us. I think Iowa matches up much better with us because of the offensive firepower they have. And then I think they lose a game at Iowa to go 22-9, likely a 7-9 kind of a seed, unless they were to win the Big Ten tournament. And it's a team that probably peaked in mid-January, but this would still be a good season for a program that many thought, given how young they were likely a year away from serious Big Ten title contention. The aforementioned Iowa Hawkeyes are next. I've got them finishing 12-8, 3 more losses at Indiana, at Ohio State, and at Wisconsin. That would actually be the most regular season wins. If Iowa got to 23, that would be its most regular season win since 1988. Hello, Roy Marble and B.J. Armstrong. That's a long time ago. And I know it sounds weird to say this if you're an Iowa fan watching this right now, but you are rooting heavy for Iowa State. Because the Cyclones could end up winning the Big 12, and that would be the best non-conference win for any Big Ten team this season, which could go further in boosting the Hawkeyes, maybe even as high as a top 5 seed on Selection Sunday, depending on how they finish in the Big Ten tournament. I've got Minnesota going exactly 10-10 in the conference next. I'm projecting them to lose at Purdue, to Wisconsin, at Michigan State, at Nebraska, at Rutgers. Yes, at Rutgers and at Maryland. By the way, the loss to Purdue has already happened at the time we're taping this. Overall record for Minnesota, 20-11. That would probably put them on the brink of the bubble. I kind of used to call this in my sports talk radio days the spittle. When you're one of the teams that's close to being you're still in, but you're the next stage away from the bubble. You're kind of in the spittle. That's probably about where Minnesota would be. And I think Minnesota probably has the toughest second half schedule in the conference this year. I've got the Indiana Hoosiers next, going 9-11. And I can make an argument here. This is the team to watch because of who they play. I've got them losing the rest of the way at Minnesota, at Iowa, to Wisconsin, and Michigan State at home. They've got Wisconsin at home, Michigan State at home, Iowa at home, and Purdue at home. So Indiana's going to have a huge say in who gets those first 4 byes in the Big Ten tournament and even ends up winning the Big Ten Conference. This finish would put Indiana at 18-13 overall. And don't forget, they've got 2 major non-conference wins over Louisville and Marquette that could end up putting them on the right side of the bubble. I think this is the toughest team to project given how underwhelming it's been, despite the talent it has, and then the schedule that it has down the stretch. So I'll split the difference and pick them to go 5-5 in their last 10 games. Ohio State, I also believe, is going to finish 9-11. I think they lose at Indiana, at Michigan State, at Maryland, at Purdue, and then at Northwestern. This would give them a record of 19-12. And they'd probably be fighting to avoid an opening round play-in game in the NCAA tournament heading into the Big Ten tournament. Remember, they had a very strong non-conference resume. So as long as they don't tank, they should feel pretty good about hearing their name called on Selection Sunday. I've got Northwestern finishing 7-13, although that didn't include the loss to Penn State on Monday night. So they're now a game behind my projection. Overall, basically a 500 team. And they've been scrappy and competitive all season, despite a rebuilding roster. I've got Illinois finishing 6-14 in the league. They've got some competitive, winnable games at home down the stretch. Rutgers, I think, will finish 6-14 down the stretch. I know they have 4 conference wins already, but a much tougher second half schedule beginning tonight as we're taping this performance against our Michigan Wolverines, I think maybe brings them back down to earth a little bit. Nebraska is just an incredibly disappointing team. Easily the most disappointing team of the season, and has way underperformed the talent that it brought back. And then I have Penn State finishing with only a couple of conference wins, and it seems like it was eons ago that the Nittany Lions beat nationally ranked Virginia Tech in the Big Ten ACC Challenge. Now, if these projections turn out to be correct, okay, this is what the Big Ten tournament field would look like in the middle of March if these projections turned out to be correct. Your byes would go to Michigan State, Michigan, Purdue, and Wisconsin. The opening round games would be number 12, Rutgers versus number 13, Nebraska, number 11, Illinois versus number 14, Penn State. Your first round games, number 8, Indiana versus number 9, Ohio State. I could see a scenario where that might be a winner go home in terms of making the NCAA tournament, particularly for Indiana. Maryland would be your 5th seed. They'd take on the winner of Rutgers and Nebraska. Minnesota as a 7 seed against 10th seeded Northwestern. That's not a game Minnesota would want to lose if it wanted to make the NCAA tournament. And then 6th seeded Iowa would face the winner of Illinois, Penn State. And then that would set up quarterfinal Friday. You'd have number 1 seed Michigan versus the winner of Indiana and Ohio State. Number 4 seed Wisconsin versus either Maryland, Rutgers, or Nebraska. 2nd seeded Michigan State versus the winner of Minnesota Northwestern. And number 3 Purdue would take on Iowa, Illinois, Penn State. So there would be, on that first Friday there of the Big Ten tournament, quarterfinal Friday, potentially some really compelling matchups there, and matchups that will have a huge say in where Big Ten teams ultimately get seeded and selected in the NCAA tournament. Back here on Michigan Podcast, I'm Steve Deace. No Michael Spath this week, so I've got a few extra minutes to get something off of my chest. And I've watched something on social media and on the Michigan message boards the last couple of days that's annoyed me. And it comes and it coincides with this story that broke yesterday from Josh Helmholt, I should say, at Rivals.com, who says 3-star Michigan 2019 athlete commit Amari Pisak-Hickson will not sign with the Wolverines this week. All right. And so this has touched off a whole debate about processing and what that means. And, you know, when you give a kid a scholarship, you have to take them no matter what and everything else. And there's a couple of things about this that I want to discuss here for a few minutes. Number one, and I said this last year with the advent of the early signing period. And on next week's episode, because signing day is tomorrow, and on next week's episode, or the number 2 signing day is anyway, on next week's episode, we'll go in depth on all the recruiting in the Big Ten, Michigan, and really take our first look at how the various rosters in the Big Ten Conference that are, for the most part, there'll be some transfers still. Michigan maybe even in the transfer market as we speak. But for the most part, we kind of have an idea now with the early entries, and after the second signing period this week, we're going to kind of know the vast majority of the players that make up the bulk of the rosters in college football. So we'll have our first peek ahead to the 2019 college football season here on Michigan Podcast next week. But I said this last year with the advent of the early signing period. Let me repeat this very clearly, okay? If you have a player that is committed to your school and doesn't sign during the early signing period, you should not consider him a commitment any longer unless he actually signs with your school in February. Meaning, from the end of December until the first Wednesday in February, the second signing period, you should consider him uncommitted. Period. No matter what you hear or read, and some people sometimes kind of have to give you a company line. I'm just telling you this. I don't have any inside sources. I'm just a fan with some experience covering stories. So I'm using that expertise to tell you how I'm handling this as a fan myself. If a young man is committed to your school, and that's not just for Michigan fans, if you're a fan of any other program listening to me or watching us right now, if a young man is committed to your school prior to the early signing period and he doesn't sign in December, you should not consider him a commit. At the very least, he's open to other options, or the coaching staff may be open to finding other options for that scholarship as well. Okay. So that's number one. If they're committed to your school in December and they don't sign, I wouldn't consider them committed to your school. Let me give you an analogy. We might be engaged to be married. There's a date where the wedding is to take place. I don't show up for the wedding. Would you still consider us engaged? All right. Doesn't mean at some point in the future we won't get to the church on time. But right now, would you consider us engaged if we had a wedding date, we were engaged, set a date, and then I didn't show up? Probably not. Okay. So keep that in mind. That's number one. And then number two, here's the reality. I've watched people on message boards say stuff like, "Oh, we're Michigan shouldn't process guy." Well, first of all, what's processing? Processing means you took a commitment from a young man or offered him a scholarship, and then ultimately, for various reasons, maybe it's academics, but often it's just the fact he's not good enough. You processed him and said, "Hey, good luck to you down the road, but we aren't going to be able to have you here. You just didn't pan out, and we offered you, made a mistake, what have you." Okay. Number one, Mr. Piece of Hickson ended up getting a scholarship offer to Kansas University this week. So he's still going to get a free education at a fine university in the Power 5. He is not a victim. All right. Almost every kid that gets processed by a school, and it happens pretty much across the board in big time college recruiting, ends up with a scholarship somewhere else. Ends up with a free education somewhere else. Okay. I know we're on the march for victims in America today, but Amari Piece of Hickson may be disappointed. Hey, I don't blame a kid who would prefer to play at Michigan than Kansas. That's called paying attention the last 10 years, but he's not a victim. Disappointment's a part of life. You know, I mean, I've wanted to sell more books. I'd like to have 40,000 subs to this channel. We have 4,000. So I'm thankful for the ones that we do have. Thank you to all of you. You know, we don't suck around here. You know, we're building a loyal audience at a modest pace. I'd like it to be bigger. I'm disappointed it's not, but disappointment is a part of life. Welcome to adulting. I'm not a victim because we have 4,500 subs instead of 45,000. And Amari Piece of Hickson is not a victim because he's going to play football for free at Kansas instead of Michigan. He's disappointed, sure, and he should be, but he's not a victim. So stop that. Stop it. All right. If you want to compete at this level, the reality is there are certain things Michigan will never do, other schools do. There's just a certain level of $500 handshake. There's just a certain level of, hey, maybe mama needs a new job. Let's do this Nick Nolte blue chip style. There's a certain level of skullduggery and chicanery Michigan will not do that several of the schools that you want us to compete against do on a regular basis. Well, if we're not going to do those things, then within the rules, in order to even remotely have a chance to compete against them, to even remotely have a chance, we're going to have to do whatever we can do within those rules to give us the most advantage we have. And one of the things we do is, in the end, we're not going to use a scholarship on somebody who's just not good enough to play here. Period. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. They're scholarships, not entitlements. They're scholarships, not subsidies, okay? Nobody's entitled to anything. And get off your high horse, because you're not jumping on message boards when kids decommit from Michigan and go to other schools. You're not jumping on your high horse when Michigan gets decommitments from other schools. Like, you know, Cade McNamara, our quarterback this year, was committed to Notre Dame. We flipped him and got him to come to Michigan. Why aren't you all incensed? I can't believe Michigan's flipping a commitment from another school. Stop it. All right. Stop it. Okay. This isn't an ethics class. All right. It's college football recruiting, and everybody still ends up with the chair to sit in when the music starts. It may not be the lazy boy lounger you were counting on, but it's a chair nonetheless. There aren't any victims here. It's a meritocracy, and I'm sure he's a fine young man. And you know what? God bless him if he goes to Kansas and proves us wrong. But the guy we pay $9 million a year to evaluate and make such decisions decided he wasn't good enough to play here. So you know what? That should be good enough for me, and that should be good enough for you. And no, we didn't crush anybody's still beating heart. No, we're not a renegade program. No, we're not above it all. Just do me a favor. Stop it. Because the same bit of you bitching and moaning about this are the same ones that jump on my Twitter feed and fire everybody at the first sign of adversity when we're not winning on Saturday, okay? So, as the great prophet Dave Chappelle once said, you played yourself. If you like what we do here, WolverineDigest.com is the website. We update it frequently with commentary. If you don't want to wait until Tuesday and when a new episode gets unveiled each week, keep updated each and every week at WolverineDigest.com. Both myself and Michael Spath from WTKA and Ann Arbor write commentary there each and every day. WolverineDigest.com. Back here on Michigan Podcast, this week's Twitter poll, we asked you, who wins a national championship first? 75% of you believe John Beilein will win one before Jim Harbaugh. And that's about the ratio that I thought we would see. It's not as much of a slam dunk as I think most people think. I mean, in college basketball, it's single elimination. You got to win 6 in a row. I mean, there have been all-time great teams. 1984 North Carolina, Michael Jordan's last year, for example, that don't even make the Final Four, let alone win the NCAA tournament. How about Kentucky with the Brow? And they were maybe the greatest team ever, undefeated. Didn't even win. They got bounced in the semifinals by Wisconsin. So it's such a crapshoot. In order to win the college basketball tournament. On the other hand, with college football, you pretty much know you have to go through. You have to go through 6 in a row in the postseason, but you know you pretty much got to have to go through all of the best teams. You're likely not going to get, a friendly bounce like Michigan had last year when Texas A&M upset North Carolina in the second round of the tournament, so Michigan didn't have to play them. So it's not as simple, I think, of a formula as people think. But it's an interesting question to debate nonetheless. This week's question of the week comes from Brandon Beery. He says, so a seemingly 2-horse race for the Big Ten just got turned on its ear last weekend. Is this a wake-up call for the Michigan teams or the opening Purdue and Wisconsin needed to take it away from them? And he's referencing Michigan and Michigan State. Looked like the class of the league the first month of the season, but with Indiana winning at Michigan State, Michigan losing its second conference game as well last weekend at Iowa. Maybe, these teams are a little bit closer than we thought. I actually think we're kind of where we thought we were after the non-conference. If you go back and watch our Big Ten preview episode, I thought Michigan and Michigan State were going to share the Big Ten title with 5 losses. I think we forget that at the end of December, this conference had 10 teams in the top 50 of the NCAA's net rankings metric. We forget Ohio State was one of only 2 teams in the country that posted 2 top 40 RPI road wins in the non-conference, or top 50 RPI road wins in the non-conference. We forget Indiana beat Louisville and Marquette. Those are 2 top 20, top 15 teams right now. They beat them in the non-conference and then, started 3-7 in the Big Ten. We have forgotten how deep this league is because now everybody's playing each other. And so now when a team in the league wins, it's at the expense of another team. So when you see Indiana beat Michigan State, you start thinking, well, maybe Sparty wasn't that good. But you forget when Indiana beat Marquette and Louisville, who, by the way, beat Michigan State in the Big Ten ACC Challenge. Remember, Louisville won that game. We are forgetting how good some of these teams are because now they're playing each other. So all of your success is at the expense of someone else in the league. So I think this is more about the depth we saw from the Big Ten in the non-conference is now that we're getting further and further into conference play. Now you're seeing that kind of cream rise back to the top again. I think I looked at the NCAA net rankings before we taped this week's episode, and 19 of the top 55 teams in the net rankings are from the Big Ten or the ACC alone. 19 of the top 55. So who knows? Maybe the league won't get 10 teams in to the NCAA tournament, but I bet you it gets at least 8. And I could certainly see it perhaps even getting 9. Well, of course, we love to know what you think about what we think. One way you can tell us is by following us on Twitter at Michigan Podcast all week long. You can also click like here on this video on YouTube. That would certainly help us, and share our page, subscribe, and share it with others. Do the same if you just do the podcast version. If you could give us a subscribe and a 5-star review, we would like that as well. I want to thank our friends at Detroit Sports Podcast who help us get the word out about the Michigan Podcast each week. And you always have WolverineDigest.com for all of the analysis we do in between episodes as well. Until next week, go Blue.